Hello, everyone. We're excited to have you with us this evening. I'm Dr. Juwan Johnson, the postdoctoral Mellon Foundation Fellow with the Lemon Project. And before we get started, I'd like to do our land acknowledgement. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansemond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. First, we are delighted to have you all with us this evening. And over the past year, I've had the pleasure to interact with hundreds of students and community members, many of who are here today, directly and indirectly via genealogical consultations, the Summer Sankofa Genealogical Workshop, Porch Talks, the Lemon Learners Summer Camp, and also while providing scholarly support to institutions like Oak Grove Baptist Church, the historic First Baptist Church, and groups such as the Hundley Family History Committee. That said, I'm excited to hear from our community partners who are writing and telling their stories, an essential American story. The individuals and institutions and groups I've had the pleasure of working with are dedicated to the documentation and thoughtful interpretation of African-American life, history, and culture year-round. And they've inspired the theme of tonight's program, Black History, Local, Living, and Imaginative. So just indulge me for a moment as I offer some context for the theme of our program this evening. Black history is local. Black history is the story of everyday people, not just those nationally or internationally recognized. As we learned in the 2017 movie Hidden Figures, there are unsung heroes working around us, making a better world, and they come from all walks of life. The local narratives tell the story of people building, celebrating, suffering, loving, and learning. And local historians, as represented here tonight, are telling authentic narratives. In Manny Marable's book, Living Black History, How Reimagining the African-American Past Can Remake America's Racial Future, he states, how can the authentic history of Black people be brought to life? By authentic, I mean a historical narrative which Blacks themselves are principal actors, and that the story is told and explained largely from their vantage point. The authentic narratives reject out-hand inferiority, biological, genetic, cultural, of people of African descent to any other branches of the human family. Through developing authentic narratives of displaced, discarded, and misremembered communities through genealogical research, historic preservation, and memorialization, we engage in the possibility of making new histories useful for shattering myths and misrepresentations of marginalized people. We also restore dignity to our African descended ancestors who suffered unnecessary traumas undergirded by capitalism tethered to the myth of white supremacy. We also amplify the stories of survivors who built nurturing communities amidst a system of racial apartheid. The stories of their lives, as told by their descendants, give hope for the living. Black history is living. Living history is more than a dramatic interpretation of historical events, but it is about people working diligently to ensure the stories and contributions of African descendant people are not obfuscated or excised from the annals of history. It is a living history because we are to practice the principle of Sankofa, realizing the past can serve as a guide for planning the future, and hopefully a more equitable one. In this vein, we conduct oral histories, transfer documents, photos, ephemera to those we entrust, and restore places where we lived, loved, worshiped, and eternally rest. We recover family ties and links, and link with unknown relatives of the past and present through genealogical research. Black history is alive because people of African descent are making history every second. And lastly, Black history is imaginative. And I draw from a quote from Manny Marable on this: preserving our proud past and presenting with integrity the stories of these extraordinary men, women, and non-binary genderqueer people helps us to imagine new futures and to use history as a critical force for change. Tonight, as you listen to our guest speakers, you will hear the themes of Black history as local, living, and imaginative. That said, I will briefly introduce our guests in the order they will be speaking. Vicki McGill. Vicki is an accomplished photographer, graphic designer, social media strategist, and family historian who began her genealogical research with a high school project in the mid-1980s. Over the years, Vicki has collected a variety of oral histories, photograph documents, including funeral programs, photos, and other resources to assist in pulling her family's history together, and continues to dig through the records. Her current work involves wills, succession records, enslavement transactions, Emancipation and Freedmen Bureau records for ancestors in South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and other states where her ancestors lived and were enslaved. Tonight, her presentation is Discovering Our Ancestors' Lives in Williamsburg, Virginia, which includes details about Benjamin White Jr. and Sr. and the importance of doing research and telling our ancestor story. Secondly, we have the Hundley Family History Committee presenters, and I'll start with Ms. Vicki Anderson Simmons, who is an attorney, historian, and civil rights activist and wellness advocate. In her professional life, which she retired from in 2020, Vicki served as the National Director for the Office of Civil Rights at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. During her tenure, Vicki became a self-proclaimed workaholic and began using Reiki, drumming, herbalism to bring balance to her life. Her approach has led to the launch of Soul Hobby, an organization that brings people together through programs and practices that heal the soul. Vicki became passionate about civil rights during her time as a student at Howard University. She credits the faculty for opening her eyes to history, resilience, and excellence of African Americans. That passion was extended to her family history, which is deeply rooted in York County, Virginia. For over 30 years, Vicki has dedicated herself to unveiling and telling the hidden stories of her ancestors and others who share similar experiences in York County. And last but not least, Ms. Kristen Allen was born in Washington, D.C. and raised in Columbia, Maryland. She has been in the behavioral traffic safety field for over 25 years. Kristen started her career as a graduate intern with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration in 1995. She is currently a special assistant in the NHTSA's Office of Regional Operations and Program Delivery. She received a BS degree in 1992 from Hampton University and her MS degree in 1997 in transportation planning from Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Their presentation tonight is Hidden Stories of the Reservation, York County, Virginia Profiles in African American History. Let's give our guests a virtual applause. And first we'll start with Ms. Vicki McGill.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. I am Vicki McGill, daughter of Herman McGill, granddaughter of Esther Bell Irving, great-granddaughter of Francis White, great-great-granddaughter of Richmond White, great-great-great-granddaughter of Benjamin White III, great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Benjamin White Jr., and great-great-great-granddaughter of Benjamin White Sr. Benjamin White Jr. and Benjamin White Sr., my fourth and fifth great-grandfathers, lived and were enslaved in Williamsburg, Virginia in the late 1700s. My journey. My first family history project was in high school in the mid-1980s, which took me to the National Archives to find my family on the US Census on microfilm, long before the internet existed. I began my research again in preparation for a family reunion, focusing on all sides of my family history in 2008, and have continued off and on since then. The COVID pandemic has provided me more time to work on this research and has allowed me to take it much farther. I spend many Friday evenings digging through Freedmen's Bureau records and other records as part of Dr. Shelley Murphy's Freedmen Friday group on Zoom. Dr. Murphy researches the enslaved laborers who built the University of Virginia and works to find their names and their descendants. A year ago, I shared documents I had found about the enslavement of my ancestors in the city of Williamsburg and York County, and Dr. Murphy shared Geographically, my ancestors were a lot closer to William and Mary than UVA, and she connected me with Dr. Jawan Johnson, who was doing the same type of work at William and Mary as part of the Lemon Project. Over the past year, Dr. Johnson and I have met virtually several times and a few times in person, sharing findings, resources, and insights about a variety of subjects. Discovering the details of the lives of my fourth and fifth great-grandfathers begin with the Mary Stith Tin Shop historical report from the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation Library. Mary Stith was the daughter of Reverend William Stith, third president of William and Mary, and Judith Randolph, his first cousin. The report documented the history of Mary Stith's property and provided details of Stith's life and the people she enslaved, including Benjamin White Sr., who she manumitted in 1791, along with a few others in York County. According to the report, Mary Stith's depth of feeling for her former slaves is apparent in the way she provided for them after her death. She wrote her will on the 15th of December, 1813, and it reads in part, "All the colored people in my life, being born my slaves, now liberated, I think it my duty not to leave them destitute, nor to leave them unrecompensed for past services rendered to me. As in the cause of humanity, I can do but little for so many, and that little my conscience requires me to do. Therefore, I subject the whole of my estate to the payment of my just debts, and to the provision which I herein make for them." And with that, she bequeathed her remaining property to those she enslaved. Although freed in 1791, Benjamin White Sr.'s freedom did not come without limitations. In 1793, the Virginia General Assembly passed legislation requiring all free Negroes and mulattoes in the Commonwealth to register with the clerk of court in the community in which they lived. They were free to sell their services and were to be registered and numbered in a book by the town clerk. This register sometimes recorded their names, ages, color, status of emancipation details, by whom and in which county court the registered Negro had been freed. Registration was required for free persons every 3 years. In the displayed registry from 1834, he was listed as a shoemaker. Mary Stith passed around 1816, leaving Benjamin White Sr. a monetary sum of 30 pounds, which would be worth 3,116 pounds or 4,171 US dollars today. Benjamin White Sr. was documented as a property owner in 1789 through 1849 on personal tax lists and in free Negroes registries in the city of Williamsburg. In 1793, Benjamin White Sr. purchased his son's freedom as detailed in this court document, which reads, "Know all men by these present that I, Benjamin White, of the city of Williamsburg, for and in consideration of the material love and affection which I have and do bear to for my son and slave Benjamin White, the property of the Honorable John Blair, of whom I purchased the said Benjamin White, my son, do by these presents set free, emancipate, and discharge the said Benjamin, my son, and slave from all manner of service and servitude, and do declare him to be in perfect state of freedom and entitled to all the advantages, immunities, and privileges which I legally can enjoy. In witness whereof I here until set my hand and affix my seal this 31st day of December in the year of our Lord, 1793, which means Benjamin White Jr. began the year of 1794 as a free man. For me, this document was an awesome discovery in the York County Court microfilm collection at the Library of Virginia in Richmond, where Dr. Johnson and I met there one Friday last year, once they reopened to researchers. That Saturday, I read through the emancipation deeds and realized that the younger Benjamin White had been enslaved by a different family. the Blairs, which prompted me to send this document to Dr. Johnson to verify that I was reading this correctly. In addition to verifying that my eyes were not fooling me, Dr. Johnson provided some details about the Honorable John Blair, which began my research on this enslaver and his family. The Honorable John Blair was the nephew of James Blair, founder and first president of William and Mary. He grew up in one of Virginia's most prominent families as the son of John Blair Sr., Virginia's acting governor and a member of the House of Burgesses. John Blair Jr. attended the College of William and Mary. He followed his father's footsteps by becoming a member of the Virginia House of Burgesses in 1765. Blair played a large role in the drafting of the Virginia Constitution and later the United States Constitution at the Constitutional Convention of 1787 and was one of 3 Virginia delegates to sign the document. Discovering that your ancestor was enslaved by one of Virginia's most prominent families in colonial Virginia, a drafter both of the Virginia and United States Constitution, whose signature is on the US Constitution, the document you see on school trips to the National Archives Museum, was unimaginable. Finding out that he was an inaugural United States Supreme Court justice nominated by George Washington gave me pause in realizing my ancestors' proximity to the founding of this nation. Benjamin White Jr., emancipated in 1791, he later appears on the August 1812 York County Free Negroes Registry with a description of being about 21 years of age, 5'8", having a scar on his left leg and 2 on his right arm, dark mulatto with long bushy hair. He was also documented as a free person of color in the US censuses from 1810 to 1840 in the city of Williamsburg and York County. They had connections to the community. First Baptist Church of Williamsburg, started in 1776, is one of the United States' oldest organized African-American churches, which began in a brush arbor on a local plantation. Gowan Pamphlet was an early and longtime pastor of the church until his death in 1810 and got the church admitted to the Dover Baptist Convention. Benjamin White Sr. administered Pamphlet's estate after his death. Benjamin White Jr. was part of a delegation that attended the convention on behalf of the church between 1810 and 1830 and is assumed to have served as a pastor of the church at some point during that time period. Today, the church is celebrating more than 245 years of existence, and in the past year, became part of a colonial Williamsburg and First Baptist Church archaeological project on Nassau Street, where remains of their original building from 1818 were discovered, along with at least 30 intact graves. In 1956, Colonial Williamsburg bought this property, paved over it, and turned it into a parking lot. Thoughts and possibilities about this research. What if Benjamin White Jr. and Sr. had not been enslaved? Had been able to legally read and write and even attend William and Mary? What would their lives have been like? Being so close to William and Mary, what potential would they have had if they had had the opportunity to attend? Benjamin White Jr., enslaved by the Honorable John Blair Jr., a framer and signer of the United States Constitution, the document that formed the government of this country. He literally existed in the midst of the founding of the United States. What did he witness? Who did he come in contact with? James Madison, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton? The possibilities are endless. Did he travel with Blair to Pennsylvania for the Constitutional Convention? When Blair was appointed as an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court, did Benjamin Jr. travel with him to Pennsylvania, New York, other locations the justices met in the early years? Okay. This research is both possible and very important and must be done. And we must do it. Don't limit yourself to just online resources. Courthouses, libraries, historical societies, universities, and other repositories have documents that might not be digitized or accessible online. So these institutions have to be visited. Share your findings with others. Other researchers and family members may see something or know something about the area or the record set that you haven't yet thought of. I mean, if I hadn't sent the deed of emancipation to Dr. Johnson, I wouldn't have even gone down the rabbit hole of John Blair Jr. Timelines are very important to keep track of where your ancestors were at different points in time. What documents have they found? What documents are they found in? And to resolve whether or not the person you have found on a document truly is your ancestor. Get to know the laws for the places and time periods where your ancestors were. Laws governing the conditions of your free or enslaved ancestors changed over time and from place to place. Researching the enslaver's family may lead you to other ancestors, other enslavers, other locations, and many other clues. Often this research can be frustrating, emotional, and even traumatic. Give yourself grace and time to process what you have found. Take breaks, then start again. We must tell our ancestor stories. We are all part of a descendants community and must tell the stories of our ancestors' lives. Whether free or enslaved, they led full lives and helped build this country. Our ancestor stories are out there in records beyond just the US Census, waiting to be found in plantation records, sales transactions, marriage settlements, deeds of emancipation, free person registries, vital records, court cases, wills, and probate papers. And if they attempted self-emancipation, they might be enslaved runaway ads. They might have appeared in the newspaper. They may even show up in great detail in Freedmen's Bureau records. It is up to us to uncover their lives and tell their stories. Thank you. To William and Mary, the Lemon Project, Dr. Juwan Johnson, and to everyone who attended this Porch Talk, please be sure to check out the blog Dr. Johnson and I co-authored, which was published yesterday on the Lemon Project blog site. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vicki McGill. Wonderful presentation. And up next, we have the Hundley Family History Committee. Let's give them an applause as they come. And also feel free to list questions in the chat. We look forward to a lively conversation afterwards.
I just want to verify that you guys can see the title screen, slide. Okay, thank you so much. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kristen Allen, and I am joined by my beautiful cousin, Vicki Anderson Simmons. We are pleased to be with you today, celebrating Black History Month. You will hear the hidden story of some of our ancestors who resided at the reservation, which is the land currently occupied by the Naval Weapons Station, Yorktown. While our story covers the experiences of our Hundley ancestors, it is one of many that can be told about families from the community. Before we get started, we would like to take a moment of silence to thank all the ancestors from the reservation and for their resilience and sacrifices. Thank you. Cousin Vicki?
Thank you, Kristen. Our hidden story is grounded in a rich oral history and supported by academic studies, archaeological findings, and other data housed at the U.S. National Archives. Today, we are sharing the amazing journey of Anthony and Octavia Hundley and their children who resided at the reservation, or what is known as the Naval Weapons Station, Yorktown. Now, to understand what is hidden, we must provide you with some context. We will start with significant national events from 1862 to 1922, which covers the Civil War, Reconstruction, and World War I. Oh, please. We will then narrow the scope and discuss how national decisions by the US government impacted our ancestors in real time on the reservation. So now let's talk facts. Free Blacks owned land in Virginia as far back as the 1700s. In the case of the reservation, free Blacks lived in close proximity to the Tinsleys, who you will be hearing about. The Tinsleys owned about 1,100 acres and enslaved 39 men, women, and children. One of the Tinsleys' neighbors was our ancestor, William Hundley, a free Black man who owned $300 in real estate, according to the 1850 census. Next slide. So now that brings us to our first part of the timeline on the national level. In 1862, Abraham Lincoln was president, and the Civil War had been going on for about a year. To challenge the Confederate stronghold in Virginia, Lincoln launches the Peninsula Campaign, a military strike that begins in Hampton and works northward to Yorktown and Williamsburg, right in the very backyard of our ancestors. Now, while it is not a clear win for either side, the battle at Yorktown resulted in Confederates abandoning the city, and that opens the way for self-emancipated African Americans to settle on abandoned lands. Following the campaign, Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which granted freedom to slaves from rebel states. Next slide. So we come to 1864, and Lincoln is elected to a second term. As the Union continued to win battles in southern states, white-owned farms are abandoned or confiscated, and by February 1864, the Tinsley Plantation is included in the Union's inventory of abandoned property and settled by more newly emancipated African Americans. Next slide. Then we come to 1865, which is quite a pivotal year. On the national scale, the war is drawing to an end, and Lincoln needs to figure out how to put the country back together. His prior plan to move Blacks to places like Liberia and Haiti aren't looking so good, and in fact, failed. In January, he directs War Secretary Edwin Stanton and General William Sherman to meet with 20 Black pastors to determine how they wish to live following the Civil War. This meeting begets the famous 40 acres and a mule order, also known as Special Order 15. This reserves land in Georgia and South Carolina for Black settlement. Now, while this is probably the most famous doctrine associated with Black land ownership, there is a different reality happening at the reservation. By March, Congress creates the Freedmen's Bureau, which oversees the transition of African Americans from slavery to freedom and also manages the distribution of abandoned lands. Next slide. So now, what's happening at the reservation? Before I get there, let me just tell you that in April, Abraham Lincoln is assassinated, and he is replaced by a Southern sympathizing Vice President, Andrew Johnson, who repeals the 40 acres and a mule order and implements plans to return land to white Southerners. Johnson's new policies prompt the Tinsleys, remember those people who owned 1,100 acres, to reclaim property in Yorktown. By this time, however, the Union had conducted an occupational census, and the Tinsleys returned to a Black community with 67 farmers, 20 oystermen, 6 men who were serving as farmers and oystermen, 2 blacksmiths, 2 seamstresses, 2 school teachers, y'all, 1 laborer woman, and 1 workwoman. And this was just part of the occupational census, let alone those others who lived there. Now, like many other former slave owners, the Tinsleys can't manage 1,100 acres, not without slave labor. So what do? They begin selling parcels to Black people who were already living and thriving in the area. Next slide. So now we move to the period between 1866 and 1880. On a national scale, Congress is on a roll. They've passed the 14th Amendment, granting citizenship to African Americans, the 15th Amendment, which grants Black men the right to vote, But on the downside, the Freedmen's Bureau is terminated in 1872. And by 1877, the Union withdraws from the South and the Reconstruction period ends. Just 3 years after all of this madness, in 1880, Anthony and Octavia Hundley purchased property on the reservation. And now I will turn it over to my lovely cousin, Kristen, to continue our journey through the Jim Crow era and World War I. Kristen?
Thank you, Cousin Vicki. African Americans have largely been ignored in historical studies, even, surprise, surprise, in Virginia, where African Americans have lived since 1619. Historical evidence suggests that at least one freed Black community was established in York County by the middle of the 1800s. The free Black settlement was the foundation of a post-war community known as the Reservation, which is where Anthony and Octavia Hundley resided. This is a picture of the parceled land of the Hundley family, located between the James and York Rivers. At that time, the area was agriculturally rich in timber, produce, oyster beds, and a fishing industry. So during the years 1830 to 1860, prior to the Civil War, large numbers of free African Americans came to York County and other parts of Tidewater, Virginia. Anthony and Octavia were born during the period, Anthony in 1844 and Octavia in 1848. According to the 1860 census, Octavia's father, Henry Red Cross, was identified as a free African American, and his occupation was oysterman. In this year, when Anthony was 16 years old and Octavia was 12, there were 140 free African American families living in York County. 19 families own the land they farmed, and 49 others are recorded as owning valuable property, such as boats, livestock, and tools. So here is a picture of Anthony and Octavia and their 10 children. By 1880, when Anthony was 36 and Octavia was 32, they had 6 children. It was in this year that Anthony and Octavia's father, Henry Red Cross, and others purchased land from the Tinsley family for the sum of $80. Why is this significant? It's significant because African-American ownership of land in York County was more extensive than commonly thought. Many African-Americans at the time were landless and often eked out a living as either a tenant farmer or a sharecropper. In fact, over half of the African-American families in the Nelson district of the reservation were tenant farmers in the year that Anthony and Henry purchased that land. Anthony died in 1904 at the age of 60 without a will, leaving the land to Octavia. Then Octavia died in 1912 at the age of 64, also without a will, leaving the undivided land to the 10 children. And here is a picture that we found of Anthony and Octavia captured in the 1865 census of colored people on the Tinsley farm. So the Hundley parcel or lot was described as them having over 11 acres. They had a 6-room house with a stable, outbuildings, a well, orchards, oyster beds, farm animals, crops, and all 10 children had a share of interest whether they lived there or not. So on the eve of World War I, the residents of the reservation were notified that the government was commandeering their property. On August 7th, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson issued a presidential executive order, which was numbered 1472, which claimed over 10,000 acres of land in Yorktown for a Navy mine depot to fortify the Navy to win the war. This action affected, we estimate, about 100 families. A majority of them were African-American and included the Hundley family. Additionally, the families were only given 30 days to move upon notification of the executive order. However, after Executive Order 1472 was issued, Executive Order 1492 followed it. The new executive order redefined land for the taking. It created some hope for the families that they could possibly get their land back. And then it triggered letters to the Navy from the Hundley families and other families to appeal to get their land back. So what was the Navy's role in the family's removal? So here's what they did. At the time of the order, the Navy had already taken and developed a significant amount of land. It was at this time that some believed that the term reservation, implying that the government's reservation of the land for naval purposes came to be. And then you'll see the timeline of events on the slide, and note that it took the Navy 3 years after the order was issued, April 1922, excuse me, to establish what they called a valuation board to assess the value of the family's property. The Navy sent out assessors who surveyed the residents to find out what the value of the land would be and the property would be. We have identified records at the National Archives that show handwritten responses from the families accounting for chickens, gardens, livestock, timber, oysters, and real property. During this time, the Navy told residents not to make any improvements on the property. And that meant that they couldn't farm, they couldn't lumber, they couldn't make any repairs, they couldn't tend to their oyster beds. Everything was kind of just stopped, stood still. So here you will see how the Naval Valuation Board assessed the property of some of the Hundley children. And so we did find notes on Katherine Hundley Brown's property. She's pictured here. She was the 8th Hundley child, and they said her property was nice looking. It was on close to 6 acres. It was nicely finished. It had a porch, it had eaves, it had a brick flute. That's how they described it. Okay, so the residents did not take the order lying down. From 1919 to 1923, the Hundleys and other families testified before the Navy Valuation Board to fight for the fair market value of their property. Despite what appeared to be a done deal, 77 Black families signed the following petition to the Secretary of the Navy in November 1918, which stated, "We are the owners and residents of the land in York County, which has recently been taken over by the government by the President's proclamation of August 7th, 1918. We are respectfully willing to make any sacrifice that would be necessary for the good of the government in this time of necessity. But we respectfully request that the government allow us to remain in possession of our homes to next spring." So they're asking for a little bit of time beyond that ridiculous 30-day window that they were initially given. In response, the Navy provided a short reprieve and allowed the families to remain until April 1918. But undeterred, they still fought. The residents hired a Williamsburg attorney by the name of Frank Armstead, who petitioned the Navy and US Congress on their behalf. So by November, Wilson issued a revised executive order, that was 1492, that refined the boundaries of the reservation. At that point, the Navy had sent a survey asking the residents to notify them if they wanted to keep the land if the Navy decided not to use it. So this is Hundley family attorney and attorney to other reservation families, Frank Armstead. He was very sympathetic to Black families and wrote several briefs on their behalf to the Navy. And then he engaged directly with Congress on unfair taking practices. He challenged the interpretation of Executive Order 1472, which at that time, that order limited compensation to displaced landowners. So here is a picture of Joseph Dochundley. He was the seventh child of Anthony and Octavia. He served as the representative for the estate of Anthony and Octavia. He was an oysterman and carpenter. He owned a tour boat. He was an entrepreneur. He was always self-employed and self-sufficient. He is a key figure in the Hundley family story to fight back to get their land back. So Joe owned 15 acres of land and a 1-acre oyster bed he used as his source of income for many, many years. During the valuation process, the Navy asserted that the beds were not part of the navigable waters of the US and therefore could not be considered property of the residents. You know, it's crazy, it doesn't make sense. They refused to compensate Joe for his oysters. Then Joe and Attorney Armstead engage in a battle with the government to obtain compensation for the oyster bed. And while they got a win, and they technically prevailed, Joe only received a measly $25 to remove the oyster bed, So remember when I mentioned that the Navy sent a survey asking residents to notify them if they wanted to keep their land, if the Navy decided they weren't going to use it? Well, here is Sarah Hundley Payne and her husband, James Payne Sr. James Payne Sr. wrote a letter. He actually wrote 2 letters. And he responded in the affirmative that he wanted his land. Here's a picture of those letters that we found at the National Archives. The first letter reads as the following. Dear Sir, I have received a letter that came from the Navy for the property known as Docket 217 and had an area of 3.98 acres as shown on the government survey, stating that you will turn my land back. Yes, sir, I would like to have my land back. Thank you. And whensoever the government sees fit, thank you very much. Okay. He doesn't hear anything. A year later, June 1921, he wrote again, and you're hearing some urgency in this second letter. Dear sir, I received a letter stating that you had no need for my property. Yes, sir, I will take it back and accept compensation. I hope that I hear from you in the early period, as I have lumber laying out in the weather, and it has been for some time. It has been in that way. I did not really know what to do about it. But it has been so long since I've had the privilege, it will be a little hard. When may I have my land back, please? Respectfully, James H. Payne. How did the Navy respond? Well, nope, you can't have your land back. 4 years after the presidential executive orders, the Navy determined that not enough people had opted to return to the land, and they withdrew. They withdrew their offer to return it to landowners. So the letter that you see here is the final determination of value for the Payne lot. They got $1,375. Remember, James was not permitted to tend to the land for 4 years. I ask you, is this just compensation? It is clear to us that the residents of the reservation were not justly compensated for their property. And just as important, the story of what happened to the families remains largely unknown, and that's a sin. You will only find one line in Wikipedia if you Google the story. And the Naval Weapons Station on their website makes no mention or acknowledges the sacrifice those families made in the establishment of the base. Okay, so this is a photo of the what we call the Cheesecake Cemetery, but we respect the First Nations people that occupied that land, and we also call it the Kiskiak Cemetery. It is now all that remains of the reservation community. So while it is on a military base, the Navy does permit us, the descendants of the Hundleys, to visit but we have to have express permission by the base commander to visit the site. When we do have our family reunions every 2 years, and when we do have it in Williamsburg, we do make a pilgrimage to the cemetery to pay our respects to our ancestors. So like I said, we get together every 2 years as a family. So this was taken pre-COVID in 2018 in Williamsburg. We celebrated 36 years of coming together as descendants of Anthony and Octavia Hundley. And the reunion also marked, in 2018, 100 years since the families of the reservation were forcibly removed. So what are we doing as the history committee? We just wanted to provide some updates. So in the fall of 2021, we submitted an application to the Virginia Department of Historic Resources to apply for a highway marker, a historic highway marker, which we hope will be located close to the entrance of the Naval Weapons Station. The review committee, from what I understand, meets on March the 8th. So fingers crossed. We're hoping that we get a good outcome and we get a marker recognizing the ancestors at the reservation. We also continue to share our story in venues like we're here today doing. We are happy to engage with other families that share similar stories and other historical interest groups as well. And every now and then we've had some inquiries from the media, and we're always happy to talk to them as well as share our story. And going back to the Cheesecake Cemetery, we hope one day to work on a preservation designation for the cemetery, and also to do some very necessary repairs and restoration to the headstones that are visible and the ones that have sunk in the ground, basically due to global warming and climate change, and being very, very close to the water. There's been a lot of deterioration, and things are the cemetery needs some work. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. I will tell everybody that Dr. Johnson has been extremely helpful in helping us with our application with the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. I think I saw Shannon Mahoney on.
Yes.
Shannon, I want to thank you for all of the work that you do and all of the research that you do for our family. Thank you so much. And anybody that I've missed, thank you for all of your help. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for this wonderful presentation. Absolutely great. I want to give about 10 minutes we have left for questions and comments for our guest speakers. Okay. So we have a lot of remarks in the chat. Okay. Okay, I had a question. Just in terms of what do you hope your research will have, what impact do you hope your research will have on younger and future generations?
Who is that for?
That's for both of you, all of you, actually.
Vicki, did you want to go first? Vicki McGill?
You can go.
I can go? Okay.
Yes.
So we have actually a mission statement for our committee that we developed some time ago prior to a previous reunion. And our goal is to change the understanding and the conversation around history. As you heard when we started, we like to provide this context because the stories have not been told. So we would like to see a situation, and it's interesting given what's happening in the country. We would like to see those conversations about what has happened starting a lot sooner. My reality, and you heard that when you read my bio, Dr. Johnson, is that my eyes weren't open until I got to college about what was really going on. And that angered me because I felt like, to Vicki's point about what would have happened if I had known sooner, that I would have probably had a different kind of experience growing up as an African-American female in this country. So I think we need to change those conversations and have them a lot earlier.
Right.
For me, I hope that our research, or that my research, will help folks, first of all, realize that there's more to our history in this country than, what they present to people during Black History Month and what they, the Rosa Parks, the Martin Luther King, the Benjamin Banneker. As I've heard somebody say, we don't have to Black History Month our people and act like our people didn't stand up to or didn't accomplish as much as other people's people did. Mm-hmm. All of our people have stories. And as I mentioned in my presentation, it's in the records, and it's up to us to dig and find those stories.
I also think it's important that, as African-American history is now under attack, it's important that younger generations kind of step up and do the work. It took me a while to come to this. It was my dad saying, you need to do some research. You need to, here's the story. And I have to admit, when I was a lot younger, there was no interest, but I too regret kind of coming to it a little bit later in life. because the stories are fascinating and the stories are me. It's a part of who I am. So yeah, our stories are under attack. Our history is under attack, and we just have to keep sharing. And it's written. We're not making this up. This is written.
Thank you. We have a question here from Selma Stewart. Where did the Hundley family move to after leaving the reservation?
Oh, goodness. Who wants to take that one?
Everywhere. Everywhere.
Yeah, so I mean, there are several Hundleys that are still located actually in Williamsburg, Virginia, but they went to Hampton. Some went out of state. We have some that landed in Philadelphia, for example. You know, generationally speaking, you have folks who moved to New Jersey and later generations. And I'm sure there are some Hundleys on here older than myself who can report in on where we landed, but basically everywhere. But there are, I would say, hundreds of us still in the Williamsburg area.
And this is related to the to Vicki McGill. Are the Whites connected to the Whitings?
I just responded to Harold's question in the chat. I have not seen a connection to the Whitings, but I am putting that down on my list to explore. Thank you.
I think you have a hand raised by Brenda Dixon.
Yeah, Liz, can you please write your question in the chat room? I don't know if you have permission to speak. If it's
you can.
Or you can talk. Yes, go ahead.
Fine. Yeah. Thanks so much to both Ms. McGill and to my dear Hundley cousins. I just wanted to mention something that came up lately in the Philadelphia area because Vicki McGill had gone back to the Revolutionary era. So many of our relatives were revolutionaries. And many of us should be part of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Absolutely. I just wanted to mention that on the side of the Red Crosses, Octavia Red Cross's great-great-great-grandfather, I think, John Red Cross, was in the militia, as was also someone on the Hundley side. And again, we are not exceptions. Our history is all over this country. And not only that, many other people had their land taken away. There is such a need for us to continue to open those doors and to find that history. And we know, though, that we have been there. Yes. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, cousin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We had a question, and Dr. Mahoney just reminded me, she presented to our class last week, and one of the students had a question about reparations, and they asked if the descendants, and this is related to the Hundley family, are interested in reparations surrounding the presidential proclamation.
Yes.
Yep, we are.
Yes.
Pay us, yes. Compensate us, yes.
So, and to add to that, you know, there are many different ways to interpret reparations, so we won't get into that. But if you recall what Kristen said, I mean, starting with some acknowledgement, starting with establishing presence. And by the way, we've been to the Bay several times and have discussed this. How about putting something on your website? How about some signage? How about preserving the Kiskiak/Cheesecake Cemetery in a way that is more respectful? How about the registering it with the National Register of Historic Places? These are forms of respect. I mean, to me, that gets us to the initial threshold, and then we can talk beyond that.
Yeah, it's just as Dr. Mahoney just mentioned, visibility.
Yes,
is vital in this, and showing that there is a presence here.
And it's it's not separate from our American history. Absolutely. This is part of the American history. There is no naval weapons station in Yorktown without the reservation, and also without the first people who were there as well.
Okay.
That's part of the history.
It's 7 o'clock, but I did want to allow you all to make any last statements if you'd like, as it relates to your research, your hopes for your research, and ways that it will impact those who learn it.
Well, on behalf of the Hundley History Committee, I really want to again thank William and Mary for allowing us to participate in this wonderful session. And I want to thank, I can't see all the faces because it's like 3 Zoom pages worth of faces, but I want to thank every single one of you for being here, and also in appreciation for our co-host. This has just been wonderful. Please begin to share your stories as well. This is how we keep American history robust and true and authentic and inclusive. Thank you for having us.
Okay. Thank
like
you. Vicki, would you like to have a final statement?
Yes, I'd just like to piggyback on what my namesake said, and encourage everyone to do this research, discover your family's histories. If you are the descendant of an enslaver, share the information that's in your family. There are plantation records out there, there's diaries, there's all kinds of stuff, and people in the research community need that information.
Absolutely.
So I definitely encourage everybody to jump on board and help.
Again, thank you all for attending. A special thank you to our speakers, and everyone have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, ancestors.
Yeah, yes.